If interrupt you with any questions or save questions till you finish talking. I don't mind. Do you have a preference?
Well, I was going to say, because I'm not a contracts expert, and I'll explain why that is. But Liz and Phil, who are our senior contracts managers, are coming down for the last quarter of an hour for the Q&A session.
Okay.
So contracts questions that are in depth that I might not be able to answer, wait for them to come along.
Yeah, and it might be that I end up bringing what you might ask anyway, because it's like quite big. So maybe yeah, that's good.
So yeah,
It makes sense. If there's something that doesn't make sense, stop and ask. But if I use an acronym, that which sounds terrible for these to stop and ask me to explain what it stands for. Okay, so. So this is going to be a little bit of a whistle stop tour because it's quite a big topic and there's lots of detail and it's quite complex. So yeah, then we can cover other things at future meetings or you can ask me questions later. But it is going to be quite whistle stop. But I'm going to try and cover some principles regarding full economic costing and pricing of costing of projects. Really quick introduction to the costing awards tool. Again, it's quite a detailed tool, so I won't be able to go into too much detail. And I'm going to very briefly talk about the faculty research hubs, and then the costing life cycle. So during that bit, I'll explain sort of what the roles of of everyone in that process. Really quickly, this is just to give you the context of where we sit. So this is RPI. So we are under the Allman research and K growth. So we're in Cape Coastal Linda's team, research operations is now. So that's Verity and also assurance. And then so this is set up within the operations team. So we've got the pricing, contracts, research assurance.
Slightly out of date on contracts, but
Oh, is it? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And this, it's nice to see some pick faces. This is the pricing team. Nick and Andrew have been here so long, they're black and white. Film is also black and white, but yeah, they have been here very long time, 20+ years. So yeah, small team, definitely formed. So yes, the cost versus price thing, it's just it sounds obvious, but it's just to make that a really clear distinction when I've used the term cost and price. The cost is what we use, the full economic cost, and that's actually the true cost of the resources it takes to do the project. And they will always say the same, irrelevant of the funder. And the price is how much we're going to get back from the funder. So full economic costing. I don't know how much of you have heard of TRAC, but it's a government thing. It's from the 1990s, so pretty old now. And it was something that called the transparent approach to costing, and it was for higher education institutions to properly be able to cost the stuff they do, including research and teaching and other things. So out of that came full economic costing. So that's the methodology that pretty much all higher education institutions use. So FEC, as it gets shortened to, has we use 5 different cost headings for that. So you've probably heard of these or you've at least seen them somewhere. But yes, we've got directly incurred, directly allocated, exceptions, estates, and indirects, which we'll go through, as I say, in a little bit of detail. So directly incurred, as it suggests, they are direct costs associated with the project. So they wouldn't have happened if we weren't doing the project. So this and it's important again. It's often a hard distinction sometimes with staff, but staff on that are directly incurred, they're dedicated to that project, and then usually their salaries are specifically costed to that research project. So that's what we mean by directly incurred. And then directly allocated is the opposite. It's where we would have spent that money anyway at the university, but we're allocating a proportion of those costs to this project because we need to keep the university running, and these are things that are going to be used as part of that project. So the list is there, you can read it. One thing I say, I don't know how much you've heard about facilities, but these are facilities that we own here that's already been paid for, set up, and then but you can we can charge them out to individual projects, and they're calculated. There's calculated per unit cost for each of those facilities, which we can add to a costing, so like per hour or whatever other units you could use. So they and they're calculated every February, and they're uploaded into the costing and awards tool. Exceptions, there's a funny one because it's really relating to the Research Council's UKRI, which is our biggest funder. They're essentially direct costs, directly incurred costs, but the Research Council have agreed to fund those particular costs at 100%. So student stipend and fees, one of those, and sometimes overseas costs of working with a particular low-income country, we might be able to get full recovery of their costs. So that's what we mean by exceptions. They often refer to as exceptions from the rules. So Research Councils fund 80%, but the exception to that is exceptions. And then what we end up referring to is overheads. So we have three headings for this, which I'll explain in a minute. But it's calculated per FTE. So somebody very clever in finance does this every year, works out a rate, and it's essentially the total cost of research divided by the number of people involved in research. And that's how they get the rate, which is then uploaded, as I say, into the system every February, and it's automatically applied. So as I said, we've got three cost headings that we break our overheads into. So the estates costs, which again, it's relatively obvious, the building and premises costs. So keeping the building going, equipment maintenance, things like that. We have two types of costs within that, which is lab and non-lab. The lab is more expensive because it takes more running. And the same for infrastructure technicians. This is like an assumption that at some point in the project there's going to be a need for technical support, so that every project includes a small portion of technical time as an overhead. And again, there's a lab and a non-lab rate. And then indirect is all the other things that keeps us functioning for the people, so the administration, personnel, finance, us, so all the support that's required to sort of make a research project work. If you want to know it, I've included a slide of what the current rates are. So this is like the full-time equivalent rates. This is all done magically behind the scenes in the costing tools. So you never need to know these really. It's applied automatically based on the staff time that's added. So as I said, the distinction then is with got the cost, you then need your price, and this is often the most complicated part of it. So you can work out how much it's going to cost, but then actually how much can we get back? Some of them are really easy. So research councils, we know what their rules are, and we have sort of two distinctions of pricing. We've got those with non-negotiable rules, like research councils, and those with negotiable rules, which means that they sort of don't have rules to some extent. Which makes it really difficult because then we've got to determine our own rules. And it's worth mentioning there is actually a project at the moment to develop a proper pricing policy so that we can have our own parameters under which we apply to these ones that don't have their own rules. So yeah, we talk about price multipliers. So that's something that we have in the costing tool, but it's essentially the percentage of the cost that we can get back. I have just included the line to say that even if you only cover, say, 80% of direct costs from the Research Council, for example, you still get 100% of those costs to spend. So it's not like you can only spend 80% of the cost, it's still you spend what you spend. It's just that we don't recover it all. And there's a whole other thing that I could have gone into about QR funding, because we get an element of money back as a result of not recovering all of our funding. So, but that is complicated, and I thought there's not enough time for that. So the other thing you've probably heard of, and it's also can be controversial, is R&C, research net contribution. And the basic calculation for that is the amount we've been awarded for the price, total price, minus the direct costs. So the direct cost being the directly incurred salaries, all the non-staff costs that we're going to be spending specifically on this project, the exceptions, as I mentioned, and the facility costs, which are, again, those ones I mentioned that we calculate each year. So it's what's left. It's what's left. You spent. This is what I was saying about being able to spend your direct costs. You've spent your direct costs. You've had your amount from your funder. What's left is the R&C, and that's the contribution that goes back to the school or the department, if it's a department, or departments if there's multiple involved in a project, and that's done by finance once it's been awarded. And then there's also another complicated calculation done for schools to pay some of that back to all the other stuff that I've talked about that we cost, which is all the central services and estates and everything like that. So it's all behind the scenes. Right, so this is a point at which I'm going to depart from my slides, although there is information in the slides here that you can refer to later. I'm going to go and look at the costing rewards tool. I'm going to show you so go back a step and show you where to find this. So the cost and awards tool, along with other systems, are all available on my research, which is available. So you'll see this page. It is something we are looking to redesign, isn't it? But this is how it currently looks. And this is where you'd access the cost and rewards tool. And just to say, that big green banner means it's not the real system. So you won't the things you see here isn't actually real. So I'm just going to show you what a ready-made costing. So just to say, in terms of access to this, all academic staff do automatically have access and can create projects themselves. Some faculties don't like that because they have their own support hubs that want you to do it for you, but everyone can access this, and you will have access to all the costings that either you've created yourself or that you've been named as an investigator on. Everyone else needs a special permission to access this. It's quite closely guarded. It's got quite a lot of sensitive information in it, so it's quite quite closely guarded. And then this is what you'll see when you first open a costing. You'll see this page, and we've tried to make it as clear to see how you're progressing with this as possible by using these sort of green ticks and yellow circles. So we've got this menu down the side that tells you sort of in terms of a progress how you're doing with creating it. What was I going to show you? So the first thing I was going to show you is the funder page. So this is where you'd enter who you're applying to, and I'll really quickly show you, just so, not that you probably ever go to this detail, but when you open this, you can see this is what we talked about, the price multipliers. That's what I was mentioning about the price. So that's where this is really determines what's going to be kicked out the other end in terms of what you're covering. And all this is set up in the, we have a database behind the scenes. So the pricing team set these up, set those as a default. So when you select your funder, in theory, it tells you already what you are able to recover from that particular funder. The investigators section here is where you list all your investigators. So you can have as many as you want, as long as it adds up to 100% effort. And it's effort, not time. So it's intellectual effort. That's what should be reflected here. So it could be, yeah, so it could be as many as you. I don't think there's actually a limit, as far as I know. So it's not meant to be necessarily reflective of the time spent on it. And when you add these, all of this, anytime you're adding a person, all of that is pulling back to an HR record, so it knows which school you're in, and it's automatically defaults in. The same with staff. So this is probably the most complicated part of the filling and costing. But you can add any academic member of staff or anybody in an academic department can be added to a costing as a named person. It's all pulling from HR, and it's all pulling through real salaries, apart from professors who have protected themselves, so you can't see their actual salary. It gives you a salary band, so you can work it out within a £10,000 banding, but you don't know exactly what they're being paid. So yeah, that's the only exception, but everyone else, when it's added, is the real salary. It allows for increments and all of that, so the systems, it's all inbuilt. And you can also add unnamed staff, and again, that sort of defaults information in sort of an assumption on grades.
Sorry, I've just got a quick question.
Yeah, that's
You've got
right.
to answer it at the end.
Yeah, that's right.
You said it includes increments. Does it include promotions or
No.
possible promotions?
No, so for professors it will assume in that sense it will assume an increment, but no, it can't predict a promotion. What it will do is if you're at the top of a scale point, potentially going to the next grade, it will assume that it just keeps going. But yeah, it won't predict any other increase. We will always, again, the idea is to sort of, as much as possible, maximising what we can get back from the funder, because we want to make sure we're not underpricing things. So where we can, we imply inflation rates and all of that. So we predict, increases for the future. So yeah, where the funder allows it, we will always imply inflation. Yeah, it's not clever enough to put promotions, sadly. So yeah, so that's under 10 minutes. 10 minutes, right? Cool. We're not far off. So then there's all the non-staff costs, which I'm not going to go into lots of detail, but there's the resources. You can add consultants, subcontractors. So anybody you're buying a service off would be considered a direct cost and can be added here. And all the facilities, which again I'm not going to go into, but there's a massive long list of facilities that you can add here. And this is where you'd add your cost per unit. And then the final bit I'll mention is collaborators and partners, which is as it suggests, any collaborators that you're working on. And there's some links at the end. It tells you the difference between a collaborator and a subcontractor, if that's useful to know, and what they mean. There's also a link to on the slides, a link to sort of the description of all the different relationship types. So what's a funder, what's a lead collaborator, what's a collaborator, etc. So I won't go into that now. So the idea then is that once all of that's been entered, it generates a project report. There's also this additional details section, which I'm not going to go into, but it's essentially some things about the project, like risks and things like that. But the project report is the clever bit. It brings all of those costs together, works out from the multipliers and the inflation rates and everything like that, what's the price. That is the bit that is then used for the application form. So if I go back to my slides, and I'm not going to skip through all of these because these are things that I just covered. If everyone's from different faculties, and as I mentioned, they've got slightly different approaches in each faculty. Just because I've not shared this tab, quickly. Thank you. I've got a few slides which I will leave you to look at, that's relevant to your faculty, that tells you a bit about what your faculty research hub does. But essentially, the hubs are all there in each faculty to help with costings, and they're always up for help, whether or not you're doing your costing yourself or whether they're actually going to do it for you. So as I say, I've got a few slides all about different hubs, so I'll skip through those. It's quite a lot. They've given me various amounts of information, and I have included it all, including all their contacts, so you can contact them. So I'm going to, how long have we got?
5 minutes.
Okay, cool. This is the last part, and I was just going to explain the life cycle of a project, and it's sort of how it gets to essentially a live account, and that's when, you know, that's where the contracts team, they need comes into play. So it's first created, it's new, it gets sent to once it's ready. So it's all that bits we've just looked at gets filled in. It gets sent to an approver pool. So there's a list behind the scenes of all the approvers for a particular school. They look at the costing and they're approving it. And they're generally looking at, they'll look at things like R&C and who's in the project and staff time, etc. Once they've approved it, that's the pricing team gets involved then. We're involved right at the beginning of setting up the funder, but then at this point we're looking at the costing and checking it's all correct. The pricing team will then change it to costing approved, and that's the point at which this project report becomes used for an application form. And then once the application is done, it goes back to the pricing team to check that those two things match. And quite often, depending on the funder, it's then the pricing team who submits it directly to the funder. But there's lots and lots of other funders where that isn't the case, and that gets submitted directly by the applicant. And then if it's successful, there's various routes in this instance, but the pricing team are notified via an award notification form on the costing awards tool, done by the hub. So the first point of contact is always the hub in this when something's been awarded. Sometimes we get notified directly, but we're looking at all this because it's a big project to try and improve this process, because it's a bit confusing. It's about who to go to and when. So we are going to hopefully make it easier. The main thing is that we get to notified at some point, and then the pricing team we call it a triage. We're looking at the award to see what we need, what approvals need to be in place, what agreements need to be in place, and something I will just really quickly show you if I can. On the costing tool, which is useful, we have this award notification, award checklist, which is a really good reference point to see where, if you've got a successful project, all the actions. Oh, damn it. Thank you. Keep forgetting to press the show this instead. Yeah, all the actions and everything that are needing to happen before we can pass it over to finance are listed here. This is just one that's been just generated, so it's got no information in it, but the pricing team, when we've done our triage, we put all of the actions required, what's missing, what we're querying, etc. And you can see that along with contracts information, which.
Sorry, how do you get to that?
It's on the costing tool, on the front page of the costing tool.
Front page.
Yeah, so just if you scroll down, you'll see it there. And it's called the pricing team award checklist. So that's a really useful thing to look at if you want to know where things are. So, oh, gone too far. Quick. So once we've again, good cuddling. Once we've checked everything and we've got everything in place and the agreement's been signed, we change the status to handover, and that is when finance come in. They pick it up, we send everything to them, and they set the account up. And then they do their thing on SAP and all the bits they're checking they need to do, and the record will become live. Now, there is on the award page of the costing and awards tool a small box called expenditure summary, which I believe, and I need to double check this, but it does actually show a summary of the expenditure to date on a research project. but I have been told from finance that they rather you go to them rather than look here, because they have the more up-to-date information. But it's useful to have a snapshot as a kind of where are we up to with expenditure. And then when it's done, they change it to complete. And that is the full life cycle of a costing. And this is for information which I'm not going to go through, but that just tells you what I've just said in the table form. Finally, the links I mentioned, which covers more detail of the things I've just run through at 100 miles an hour. So apologies, I knew it was going to be quick, but yeah, I've run over on me. So
No, perfect.
but yeah, obviously there's going to be lots of questions, I should imagine, and probably things to do in future sessions, but
I only had a quick question in that I've got the costing and awards tool open and I can see my grants and I've got a live grant, but I can't see where I can find any of the things you've said, like, for example, the expenditure summary or... But don't worry if you can't show me now, I can ask you afterwards.
well, so yeah, if I it's a problem. I'll tell you what, I share my after because the problem we've got is if I share my screen, it's going to show everything to everyone. That's why it's really tricky. I'd like to go straight to the thing. So I will show you. And if anyone else needs to let me, if you want me to show you, I can show you on your particular one rather than showing everybody on the screen. Is that all right?
Yeah, and just to say, so you don't think I'm being very rude, I'm teaching up at the wave at 1.
Okay.
So I'll probably sneak out at the question point, but perhaps you can catch up another time.
Do contact me, definitely. Just feel free.
Brilliant. Thank
Thank you.
Realise we're throwing an awful lot of information at you, so
It's so helpful.
good. Well,
Yeah.
see how this bit goes. So I'm the contracts team manager. So I mentioned earlier, I'm not a contract specialist. I was brought in for my skills around systems and processes and people and teams and change management. So I'm looking at efficiencies and effectiveness of the team. And they didn't want me to particularly get involved in getting into contract review or anything like that. So I don't come from that background. I've learned a lot over the last nearly 2 years. Around contracts, but some of my team are coming down later. So if you've got any specific questions about contracts, you can ask them. So here's what I'm going to try and run through. Tell you a bit about the team, how we operate, what the implications are of charity law and trusted research, contracts and regulations, and ways you can help things go smoothly. So I thought I'd show you the contracts team. So bigger than the pricing team. We were very fortunate at the beginning of this calendar year to expand our contracts officer team. So they're our most faculty facing layer of the team. If you've ever got any general questions about contracts, they're the people to contact first. So we've doubled up on health and engineering because we get the most agreement requests out of that. I will share these slides so you can see that. Very recent change to the team. Our previous senior contracts managers both decided to leave the university at the same time, independently, and they left within the last couple of months because of the recruitment freeze. It's taken us a while to reappoint, but Phil and Liz were appointed a couple of weeks ago. They were our contracts managers, so their positions are now vacant. We are very fortunate that we've been given permission to recruit to those posts. I know that's very rare at the moment. But we are a bit squeezed at the top because Phil and Liz are doing their old job and absorbing all of the work of their predecessors. So they're feeling a bit under the cosh at the moment. But yeah, that will resolve itself. And we are going to be losing some of the people along the bottom of this screen who are on fixed term contracts in the new year. But we will survive. Every one of those roles relates to a core level, and the core level is how we allocate work to the team. So I thought I'd talk about allocation, waiting lists, turnaround times, just so you've got a sense of how we operate. So we go from core 0 to core 4. Core 0 is dealt with by our contract support team. So that's the people who look after RI contracts. And they look after our absolutely standard, simplest agreements. So drafting non-disclosure agreements, non-transfer partnerships, consultancy and services rendered, any contracts that don't need negotiating. And they can be done fairly quickly. They don't go on our waiting list. They just process those as and when they come in. Then we go all the way up to core 4. I'll mention core 2, which is where our contract officers sit, and that's where the bulk of the work goes in our team. And they're looking after just a range of everything. Our non-standard agreements, reviewing agreements coming in. And then core 4 is our senior contracts managers, and that's I guess the highest complexity, most risky contracts, government sensitive, commercial agreements, submarines, space, defence, that kind of thing. So when it comes to allocating work, you or your hubs will put in an agreement request either through the costing and awards tool or through a non-costed agreement route. And the contract support team will look at that and allocate a core level to it. So we have full definitions of each of those. And they will say what core level they think it is, and they'll put an estimated date of when we're going to allocate it to a member of the team. And I update that every week, depending on how big our waiting list is. On a Friday morning, I get a report, which is essentially our waiting list, and it comes through by date and time of submission. So there have been rumours in the past that it comes through as the highest value, the most strategically important is at the top. Absolutely not the case. We can't see those things. So it's by date and time of submission. And then I spend Friday morning looking at any that are listed that have got a required by date and making sure that we can fulfill those. Then I also look at our prioritisation requests that we've had in during the week. So I don't know whether you're aware, but earlier this year we introduced a prioritisation form. So if you want your contract bumping up to the top of the list and you have reason to do so, you can fill out a form to justify why. I'll look at that and assess it. I also send it to our faculty research managers and they have a look and they give me their advice. And if we've said prioritise, that will go up the list. And I meet with the contracts managers and we allocate work to the team. And our principle of allocating is 1 new contract per working day per week. So on a Monday morning, if you work full time, you get 5 new agreements allocated in your name. And you've got that week to focus on those 5 agreements. That's also going into a portfolio of about 65 to 75. So every member of the contracts team have it's normally around 70 live agreements in their name at any one time. But their focus for that week is those 5. If it's marked as urgent, they have to deal with it within the first 2 days. If it's not, they have to deal with it sometime that week. Here's where you can help. So if on their first review, they've got absolutely everything they need. So the agreement request form is filled in. We've got all the documents that we need. The first action is going to be starting to draft the contract or review the contract that's sent in. If we don't have everything we need, then their first action is going to be emailing you as the primary investigator and asking you to fill in the gaps. So I mentioned that because there's a window of opportunity here. If you've got a contract marked urgent and we haven't got everything we need, in those first 2 days, it's going to be an email to you saying, can you tell us everything we need? Whereas if we've got everything, it's we'll start drafting. So it's really worth making sure that when you put in an agreement request, we've got everything. Also, it should come through either the award notification through costing and awards or through research and innovation agreements, because that gives us all the questions. So don't email us with an agreement, ideally, because it just means, again, we're going to ask you for lots more information. We have introduced in the last couple of months, I don't know whether you've seen it, but an automated email will come out now when a member of the team put an agreement in their name, which will say this person's looking after your contract and here are their contact details. So you've got that moving forwards. Waiting list. So actually, as of Friday, we're at 1 week to allocation. So we're pretty good. Short amount of time on the waiting list. And since May, since we expanded the team and everybody got trained up, we've been at 2 weeks to allocation throughout the summer since May. And hopefully that will continue. We have made a change at that core 3 and core 4 level. So with our contracts managers and senior contracts managers, because essentially we've gone down from 4 staff to 2 and we are squeezed there. But as I said earlier, hopefully temporary. We're always busy, but we always say volume is manageable. example of last year's figures, last academic year, we signed off more contracts than we had coming in. So we can deal with volume. In terms of staffing, that's absolutely doable. It's expectations around turnaround times that we find really challenging. And often delays are not in our control. And I've got a couple of slides to illustrate that. So this is a snapshot from 3 weeks ago. Between the contracts team, they had 909 live agreements that they're processing. The rest is just our waiting list, what we received that week and what we allocated that week. I'm just going to focus on the 909. Oh, you can't see it because it's underneath that. But underneath there, it says 88% we're waiting for somebody else to take action. It's a significant amount. So 803, that's predominantly external partners. So 324 waiting for external partners to get back to us on something. Also, we could be waiting for external signatures. So that adds up to about 450. And then otherwise, we're waiting for input from either the academic or the research hub. And finally, it's with another department. So that could be due diligence, tax, insurance, research, ethics. So you can see the status of any agreement. Hopefully, you've all heard of the contracts pipeline. There's a document that everybody can access. You can go on there at any time. It's on my signature if you ever get an email from me, and it's on the signature of the RI contracts inbox. But it has our waiting list, estimated allocation times, and it has every contract that's live at the moment, and it'll tell you where it's up to and the last time somebody looked at it.
Can I ask quickly, sorry. Would the waiting external comments, would the PI know about that?
Possibly not. And that is something that we want to try and fix. So we're trying to improve our forms. And one of the things that we've noticed is that sometimes people get missed out of email chains.
Yeah.
And we're introducing a new bit at the top of our form that says, who do you want to be copied into all emails? And anything you can do to chase people is really good.
Exactly, I was thinking that.
Yeah, because we don't have a formal chase process, and that might sound surprising, but when somebody's dealing with 70 odd contracts, they don't have time to keep going back to people. We work on the assumption we've sent out an email, and therefore we'll wait until somebody comes back to us, and we don't know when that's going to be, and we need to work that into our work. But yeah, anything you can do to kind of nudge. But again, if you go in the contracts pipeline, you can see the last time it was updated by a member of the team. Have a look at that. Yeah.
Sorry, I've got a very quick question. This is a really stupid question, but
No such thing.
at what point is all this triggered? Because I've got a grant that's just been a nightmare from start to finish, not anything to do with contracts, but it started a while ago. And so I think various things to do with contracts, like external collaborators and things, were delayed, probably on our side.
Okay.
But I have never quite understood, like, how does that happen? How does your team get triggered? And then what exactly are you doing? So are you doing the contracts with the funder, with any external collaborators?
Yes. So we are responsible for all of the contracts, whether they're coming into us, we're reviewing them, or if you're asking us to draft them, we are responsible for that. But we also signpost out to the other teams.
Mm-hmm.
So if we need to get due diligence involved or research ethics, there'll be our team that do that and send it out, and the status will change on the record to say it's with another department. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, what should we do if, like, we just don't understand what should be happening? Like, should we contact the hubs? Can we come to you?
You can contact the hubs. They can be very helpful in that instance. If not, with the structure diagram, go to the contracts officer and they can look on our system and tell you where something's at.
Okay.
Obviously, if you can consider within that, that they've got a whole load of work to do. So investigating something for you might take some time, but you can also contact me as well. We've just produced a new service definition for contracts, which I think we're going to be doing across the team. I put on there that if you don't hear from the person who's responsible for your contract within 10 working days, contact me. And then I can look into something for you because I've got a bit more time on my hands to do that.
I've got a question. When is a contract required?
Yes.
So
Another good question.
So if I got a grant,
Yeah.
are you always involved? Or are there
A research grant, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So we deal with the award letter. We look at the terms and anything that's got terms and conditions,
Yeah.
anything that's got IP involved in it. We also look after consultancy and services rendered. But yes, anything that needs formalizing,
Yeah.
it'll be us.
Yeah, because I had things where I didn't even know contracts were needed, but I think it's getting fixed now with more of these kind of like startup meetings. So I think those weren't happening in our faculty.
Okay.
So I think now we have a grant kick-off meeting thing, which
Yeah.
hopefully.
Some of these other slides may help as to why it's needed. They may not. I'm just going to touch on turnaround times quickly. So these are our average turnaround times from last academic year. They include calendar days. So an NDA non-disclosure takes around 3 weeks. That's an average. Obviously, there are outliers. Some take a couple of days, some take longer. An average collaboration agreement takes 12 weeks. And that's been the same, I'm told, for years. And if you think about the process of a collaboration, you're trying to collaborate with 3 people. If we draft a contract and send it out and 3 people come up with 3 different amends, we've got to get everybody to agree to each of those amends. So it's just going round in circles constantly until we all come to an agreement and then it can get signed off. But that's pretty standard. I will mention that we're part of a Russell Group benchmarking survey, and that happens every few years. It happened last year, 2023, and we send in data from the last 3 to 5 years to research consulting, who crunch it all, analyse it, send it back, and we were found to be the fastest and the cheapest across all Russell Group universities. So as I'm not sure about the cheapest bit, but in terms of the fastest, so as much as you might look at these and go, that takes a long time, in reality it does. And hopefully the next few slides will help you see why. So I'm just going to touch on charity law and trusted research. So I'm sure you know, we're a registered charity. And our primary purpose as a charity is to advance education through teaching and research, and it has to be for public benefit. Research in itself isn't a charitable aim, so we have to make sure that all the research that happens at the university complies with our charitable status. So it needs to be a useful subject, it needs to be a benefit to the public, we need to be able to share the findings of research. Nobody should privately benefit. I won't go through all of those, but it has to be in the interests of the charity. So that's one of the things that we check. So that's called our primary purpose. Primary purpose comes with tax benefits. So we get money back essentially when we are working under our charitable status. We do non-primary purpose work. So that's things like consultancy and services rendered. But that's subject to corporation tax. So we have to make sure the balance is right between those two things. That the majority of our work is in line with our primary purpose as a charity. And I think when I asked a question when I went to a session, what's the percentage? Nobody can come up with one of those, but we just do more of that than that is the answer, but significantly more. Trusted research is about protecting the UK from theft, manipulation and exploitation. And it's part of a relatively new act called the National Security and Investments Act in 2021. And it means that the government can intervene to protect us as a nation, particularly around these sensitive areas. And sorry, that text is so small, but we call them 17 sensitive areas. And if you work in engineering or science, these are things that you may be familiar with, but we have to check any agreement, any research against these. Essentially, what we're doing with trusted research is looking into who we're working with. So who are the partners? Who are their friends? Who are their affiliates? Do they have shares in another organisation? And if so, do we trust them as well? Basically, where is our information going? What are we sharing with them? And where could it end up in its simplest form? Thanks. So just to talk a little bit about the kind of checks that we're doing and the areas we're looking for. So this is just to tell you about the kind of things that we're looking to comply with in terms of regulation. So I'll come to other things outside of the contract, but this is what we do in terms of checking a contract. First thing that we always look at is context. And that helps us identify what kind of risk the university is looking at. So are we looking at the redesign of a waiting room in a hospital, or are we looking at Trident missiles? And obviously we will then look at it through a different lens, I suppose. We look at the price and the payment terms. We want to make sure that the payment terms are acceptable to us as a university and also to our partners. And we get lots of different requests. I think they've probably come through costing as well, but people asking for money up front because they're a small organisation, to various other things. So we make sure all of that works. Intellectual property is by far the biggest point of negotiation for us. So making sure that we have rights around the foreground intellectual property, that we protect our background, and making sure that those terms are acceptable to our partners. We have had instances where we've got to the point of contracting on an award, and a partner has pulled out because they thought they were going to own everything and commercialize it at the end, because there hadn't been any conversations in advance to the point of the contract. So always a useful thing to talk about with partners at the right time. Publication rights and academic license, that's about our charitable status. We need to make sure that we can publish, we can disseminate, and we can also use the findings of research for academic purposes. Guarantees and deliverables are about making sure that what we're promising is realistic. So occasionally we get contracts through that, or projects through that say that we're going to generate jobs. Obviously we can't guarantee that, so we don't want to put that into a contract necessarily. So yeah, we look at realism around that. I'm just going to jump along. Limits of liability, termination and jurisdiction are really key about when something goes wrong. And I know when you embark on research, you're not thinking about what happens when things go wrong. But we need to make sure that the university has its liability limited. So we're not paying out huge amounts of money. Termination clauses are good for both sides. And jurisdiction is about, if it does go wrong, where are we going to end up in court? Ideally, we want to end up in court in England and Wales. And if not, we have a sliding scale of places that we're prepared to go to court. When you get to the bottom, there are some laws that we don't accept, like Sharia law. But yeah, there's parts of America that are much better for us than others. Generally, East Coast good, West Coast bad, and lots of things in between. And this is about when things do go wrong. And I don't know whether any of you work in medicine and have heard about this, but there was a case in June where a pharmaceutical took the University of Portsmouth to court. And they were looking for £95.4 million, and were found the university was found negligent. Luckily, within the contract, there was a limited liability of £1 million. So University of Portsmouth were only required to pay out the £1 million plus £5 million in legal fees, plus the 1.4, which was the cost of the research. But without that clause, there wouldn't be a University of Portsmouth anymore. So they are a useful tool. And that's what contracts are about really. It's about making an agreement about what you're going to do together, but also if things go wrong, how are you protected? It's not just about the terms of the contract. So I've talked through the kind of things we look in there, but these are all the other things that we have to consider. So this is about us, regulations, compliance, making sure that we're covering everything. Technology readiness levels, if you haven't heard of them, you probably don't need to worry about them. So that's engineering and AMRC. Basically, technology readiness levels are how close it is to going commercial, going to market. The one that you can't quite see because of the little square in the corner, issues revealed. Because we're the end of the chain in terms of a process, we're the point when we start doing formal agreements between parties that issues start to come up. That could be as simple as the costing on the original costing doesn't match what's in the contract. Or it might be things around IP that the other party is saying, hold on a second, we thought we were going to own everything. No, you're not. But yeah, it can reveal all sorts of issues, things around the NSNI Act about partners and their affiliates. So we deal with that and we will send that off to different departments. How you can help. Called it the university's red flags. I'd probably say points of consideration. So having seen all of those tiles that I've shown you, just be aware that those are the kind of things that we're checking in on. I would always say it's really useful to have a conversation about IP with partners relatively early on. I know in terms of relationship development, it's about getting people motivated and enthused about wanting to work with the university. But at some point, you need to have a conversation about, if we're going to do this together, who's owning what and why. Even if you don't come to a formal agreement at that point, at least expose intellectual property so that when it comes to contracts, that conversation's started. This might be a harder one, but it's really useful if you can build our timescales into your project plans. So if you're putting an application in and you know you're going to hear about it, say this time, mid-November, you're going to get the results. Having a project start date of the 1st of December, we can't manage. You won't have agreements in place for that start date. So the more you can think, okay, if we're going to hear mid-November, let's put a start date of the 1st of February. As I say, I know that might be more complicated for you, but useful to know.
Yeah. It'd be good if you had a ballpark for how much we should always allow. So would you say
3 months?
3 months, 6 months?
Yeah,
If you've got 3 months just for contracting.
for things like collaboration agreements,
Yeah.
subcontracts, yeah, things like that. Obviously you've got the table of turnaround times.
Yeah.
So those turnaround times are from point of submission to us to signing.
Yeah. And then presumably recruitment of any directly incurred staff can't happen until contracting is done.
Technically, yes.
So probably then another 3 months for that to go through
Yes.
HR and relevant. So basically,
No, I'll say yes, they shouldn't happen.
but sometimes we do.
Sometimes it does happen,
Yeah.
but obviously all the risks associated with that are
Yeah.
quite significant.
Yeah.
We're dealing with a contract at the moment that somebody's almost finished a piece of work and a contract isn't in place. Yeah, and I won't go into detail about that, but there's some tricky stuff in there. Yeah. So yeah, ideally, use the prioritization form. That's the thing I would say. If you know that something needs to happen, we will obviously consider that and make sure, try as hard as we can to push things through. But if you know that a collaboration agreement generally takes 12 weeks, it's going to take us 12 weeks. Cooperate with our processes. I don't know how much you get involved in sending in agreement request forms. And as Jenny said, we are trying to improve our interface of asking for agreements. I know when I came in, it slightly blew my mind. I don't think it's intuitive, our system at all. I'll say that now. It's very much designed for internal purposes for the team, but now we're looking at making it more accessible for you. But yeah, anything with a costing comes through the costing and awards tool. Anything that hasn't got a costing, there's a research and innovation agreements button. That's things like material transfers, non-disclosures, data transfers, stuff like that. I've already said about submitting requests with everything up front. I was asked a question recently about, can we put in a request with half the information to hold a point in the queue, so that when we get to the top, hopefully we've given you everything else. And I absolutely get that mentality. But again, it's that danger of, if it gets to the top of the queue and we haven't got everything, it's just going to slow things down. So I would say wait, particularly as we're at such a short turnaround time at the moment. Timely communication. Here are the experts. So timely communication is just to mention that we can't progress a contract without you being available. Either to talk to or to email. We get quite a flurry of requests coming just before the summer break. And actually, so, a lot of people are really good at keeping an eye on their email and checking in. But if you're going to go away for a month, don't put an agreement request in just before you go, because we can't do anything with it. We need your approval. We need your comments before we can take that forwards and get back to us as quickly as possible. I've already mentioned about prioritisation. We do have some people who always ask to be prioritised, every agreement. We do look into them carefully. We want to make sure that we get your agreement out when you need it out. If you're building our timescales into your project plans, hopefully you don't need to use it. We refer to it like a bit like a Willy Wonka golden ticket. So you get one, would be the ideal, one a year. Use it wisely. But it is there to support you to get your work done. We've noticed with some funders that they're offering shorter and shorter turnaround times in terms of award letters. We will always look at those. And on the agreement request form, there is a required by date that you can add a date to let us know that. And supporting our boundaries. I know it can be a frustrating process. We are doing a lot of work about our own visibility and communication in the contracts team. I think it's got better over the last year or so. We will continue to do that. But hopefully through this whistle stop tour, you understand the work that the team are doing and the importance of complying with those regulations and things. I think that's me. Oh, somebody asked about consultancy and services rendered. Is that anybody? It's the person who the answer as well. I've got some handouts anyway. These are a little out of date because it says research services and we're now research operations. But if you're interested, consultancy is about expert opinion and advice, high levels of specialism, and services rendered isn't. So that's more administrative, technical support. Some services rendered we handle, some go straight to finance. So if it's about rooms, facilities, conferencing, anything like that, it doesn't need to come through us because we don't need to review terms and conditions. So any agreement that is just going to be signed off doesn't need to come through us. We always talk about adding value. So the value is our experts who are over there in the corner, making sure the terms and conditions protect you and the university. Anything else doesn't need to come through us.
Brilliant. Thank you. That was really useful, both of you. Thank you very much. But just under 15 minutes then for any questions about pricing, costing, and contracts.
I had a question about consultancy, actually. If you have an external consultant that has a particular technical skill that they can bring to a project, how do you cost in their time? They have, for example, they have their own kind of company, and are there any agreed upon rates? What if they're asking too much money or something like that?
So
yeah,
that come in as there being a subcontract. Liz, Phil, would you mind coming round and standing at the front and answering questions that I can't? So this is Phil, well, relatively newly appointed. I'll use that for a few weeks. Senior contract managers. You hear the question?
yes, a pricing question.
Yeah, I was going to say it's but there isn't any rates. No, is the answer. It's that is the sort of thing that the hub will be able to work with you on in terms of working out what is a satisfactory cost. But if they've given you a quote and it has to be them, then I guess you work out, you know, what is that how does that compare to the market? It's all that kind of stuff that you'd need to do, but it's at the costing stage that you'd work that out. And then yeah, once it's awarded, then the contracting with that is kind of relevant. How much it costs, that's when they'll look into it.
Yeah, don't forget about that.
Yeah.
I had a question on, so you said something during your talk about if we've done a contract request and you've got all the information you need, then it will just progress. And if we've not given all the information, do you two have a thought on what's the main stuff that we don't put in those contract requests that then holds things up while you have to come back to us and ask for it?
A layperson's explanation of what's going on.
so many times I'll get loads of numbers and it just, you know, I have no idea, I don't understand it. So a real layperson's explanation, just a few lines so I get what you're actually doing. And then the IP position that you've agreed with your partner.
I think one of the weaknesses of our forms is it asks you questions about everything, whether they're relevant to your project or not, and they're also not mandatory. So people tend to skip quite a lot of questions. So I'm always quite surprised there is a field that says, when is your agreement required by? I'd say 10% of the requests that we get coming in actually have a date in there. So often we're guessing. But we are going to improve the form so that questions are mandatory, but also that it flows a bit better. So if you say not applicable, you can jump over things. But yeah, there's a lot, the layperson's terms, understanding the conversations that you've had so far. There's all sorts of questions in there about risk, IP, technology readiness level, all that kind of thing. If it's relevant, please fill it in.
What do you think?
I think so, yeah. Obviously, it depends on the faculty, but especially around engineering,
Whoops.
IP is yeah, very important. Perhaps these backgrounds that relate to the utilising blood project, because there will always be indemnities around third party IP, so that's also useful. Whether we're confident that we can use it or how do we own it. So,
I'll just clarify the process as well, because it's between us. So the when an award's been made, it goes to the pricing team first. So it's through the costing and awards tool. And there's some questions in this award notification form, we've mentioned it. And I think part of the problem is we've never made the questions aren't right in there, and they're two different places. So we then set up the contract record, pricing team do, which is where the whole allocation comes in. But then it gets to the team, and then they've got to go back and answer the questions. And we are trying to fix that. It's a situation we've created because we've not that's the right question. Is that yeah, we would pricing are the ones that create those contract records in the first instance. I don't think I explained that in the explanation of what we do.
I was going to ask just about what exactly is intellectual property. So I suppose I'm from the School of Psychology. So what I deal mainly with is very innocuous behaviour change interventions, get people to change things. And I might work, for example, with councils or organisations. If you had to give a really layperson's definition of when I need to worry about it and what conversations I need to be having, and is there someone that can help me with those conversations, assuming I know nothing about intellectual property? Who would I ask and where would I find out?
You have to answer the first bit. What is intellectual property?
Anything you create?
But who owns it, basically? Whether I get to still do stuff with that thing or whether it's just belongs to that organisation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's probably too basic an explanation.
Nothing is ever too basic.
Because it's got to be something, it can fall into like know-how.
Yeah.
It's with you. Beyond that, it's more something that's created that could perhaps be patented, and then sold. So can you to create a model, for example, that nobody else had thought of? You might use it.
There's things like, do you understand background and foreground? So background is what you bring to the project already. So the information, knowledge that you have, and foreground is the results of coming together on that research.
Yeah.
So it's about protecting your background,
Yeah.
and also thinking about once you've created whatever it is from your research, who can use it, who owns it, and what uses can you do with it. Yeah.
This is surprising.
It's quite a good sentence.
That's the best place to have a look. Please, thank you.
We could run a session.
a full commercialisation team.
Yeah.
You can be able to talk through everything about it.
Brilliant. Okay.
Very much.
question, but I think you've got it.
Oh, there is another one.
I've got two questions, so I'll ask one, and then if there's time, I can come back to another one. So my first question is, given that you take into consideration all those things and you say is it high risk and so on, are there instances where if I'm sort of bringing together a project and looking for funders and things, but I think it probably is a bit controversial. Should I be speaking to the contracts team and saying like, is this going to get blocked? Is there any point in me going down this route?
You say controversial, do you mean in terms of the contract or?
Well, it's in Gaza, so I think that depending on lots of different other factors, it could be controversial, it could be straightforward, but it's
Our research assurance team,
Mhm.
look at potential reputational impacts to the university and such.
Yeah.
Uh,
research assurance. You say?
yes.
Yeah,
yes.
so
Should I ask?
actually, used to be due diligence, now
So
it's research assurance.
So due diligence, due diligence at
I
Sheffield.
don't want to like put loads of effort into developing a project that's just going to, the university can say we don't want to do that. So
My understanding is you can contact them direct, so we work very closely with them.
Okay.
And we'll refer things to them, but you can also speak to them direct.
thank you. I've got another question, but I'll say after.
Okay, that was perhaps a bit more borderline. It was about IP. I had a question like that, perhaps could be signposted or so. I was wondering, sometimes I have ideas that I know I won't be able to push or to investigate. And I was wondering whether to start a blog someday, but I was wondering what to ask before, because how much do my ideas belong to the university or not? I have no clue even when I thought about them also. So
You know the answer?
yeah, that's basically what's the definition of IP in its relationship with the University of Sheffield.
Very basically, if it's created during the course of your employment, or it was done whilst you were working employment, it would belong to the university. I know in practice that's very difficult for an academic, but if, for instance, you did it on university time and it was created, that would belong to the university.
But by time, do you mean all the day, office hours, or? To me, this is not an issue, you know.
So within your working hours at the university,
Well, no, but if you did it at 7 PM, but it was basically what you're contracted to do, even if your contract said 9 or 5, so it's basically, is it you have obligation to the university will say you're contracted to do this work, this is why we pay you. So if that's, you did it for that reason, it will generally fall within the contract of service, no matter whether you what specific time of day you did it. If you did something completely separately, didn't use any university resources, then technically that would belong to you. But then if you brought that into a project, for instance, then let's say it's a grey area, or actually that might not help with that.
So definitely in the gray area, theoretician and so on.
So basically, my question is that for grants that are live, is it possible either through that My Research system to actually check your individual expenditure?
Yeah, so that's what I can't show you because I would show you everybody. I'd show you a live project that doesn't belong to you, but I can show you where it is. But on the awards page, on the slides, which will circulate,
Yeah.
this is expenditure summary box. And if you click that, it does give you a snapshot of where things are at in terms of spend. But as I said, finance like you to go and talk to them anyway. They wouldn't want you to use that as, you know, that might not be up to date, etc. They want you to just double check, but it will give you a snapshot. I can show you if you like. where it is.
Yes, please. Yeah.
is that practice finance? that you
Yes,
go to?
faculty finance, yeah. And you can see the contact. So if you need to, I can show you where that is.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Oh, yes.
Final question. So, I feel very sorry for the contracts team and the pricing team and the hubs, and everyone's been trying to chase up another university that the PI belongs there and the COI. So the things are going around and around in circles because the PI is on maternity leave. So it's changed all the figures and the dates and everything's gone up a bit because of inflation and all of that stuff. And it just keeps going. It's been months it's been going around. Like, I don't know how much I should get involved in like trying to like get people together or something like that. So yeah, because this is my first kind of real dealings with this sort of like contract with multiple institutions and things like that. So just advice on like, I don't want to be too controlling or bossy or something like that, but also like it's been months and I feel sorry for the like contracts team who keep sending out emails going like, what's going on here? So
Do you know who in the contracts team is looking after your?
yeah, should I just try and arrange a conversation with her and say,
I would probably say first person call is to have a conversation with them
Yeah.
because they won't register every single email and things like that on the system for you to be able to see. So they can look at records. We have extensive notes. They'll tell you exactly how many times they've chased, where it's up to, all that.
Yeah,
And then, yes, I think absolutely, please get involved.
yeah,
So,
yeah, okay. Yeah,
so
yeah.
I suppose
It's so awkward.
in crude terms, our job is to put into a contract what you've agreed and your partnership. So
Yeah,
ideally, if you can get that resolved.
it's the person from the other university who just doesn't seem to know what's going on. And
Yeah.
it's just like how many times I've put it in an email and just not
Yeah.
get through.
Might be worth organising a meeting.
So we can just get it done in one time.
Yeah, just organise, a Google Meet and
Yeah.
everybody on screen.
Because yeah, she must be sick of seeing my name come up in emails. Thank you.
I would say that's a general bit of advice, really. If it's complex, arrange a meeting at some point because the
Yeah.
email chains can go on forever and ever.
I just don't think maternity leave should be that complex. Like, it must happen more often than this once. So I don't know why it's been so difficult. But like I say, it's not her, it's the other university that's
Yeah.
complicating it.
I found a project I can show you, so you can see where it is. That it's not too controversial. It's a live one. So, when something's live, this will be the page that you land on. It's called the awards page, and it tells you here who the finance contact is, if you ever need to contact them. And there's this button here which says expenditure summary. It's probably not got anything in this because it's not real, but in theory, that's not enough. Let me share this one.
So how do we get to that page, Jen?
So when it's live, that will be the page you land on. When a project's live, on the costings, you go
It will take you
to,
to
yeah,
that-
so if
that
you open your
page.
costing, your specific costing,
Yeah.
that'll be the page you land on.
Okay.
Once it's live. So yeah, if this was had more information, it would have a breakdown of the budget, the actual and committed amount spent. So yeah, so if it's not,
You have a question as well, for
I do, yeah. I actually have an MTA being reviewed at the moment,
Yeah.
and I got asked a question about, is the university insured? Who do I ask about that? It says sample tissue bank sample request, basically, but they said, is the university insured against these samples? I don't know how to fill that out.
It was last year, that's all.
We asked you.
Yes,
Bank
yeah,
insurance.
yeah. So I got a list of, I got short waitlisted and then got a contact from whoever's dealing with my contract. So they just asked me a list of questions and that was one of them, like,
Insurance team would be able to say that,
Okay,
but
so
the
then-
MTAs, unless it was sort of totally a uranium high risk thing where we need a specific insurance.
okay. So maybe I just need to contact the insurance
Yeah,
and
'cause
find that out then, because I,
We pay for couriers, so you get we ship in the material.
no, it'll be shipped from the tissue bank. I will be receiving it, yeah.
So basically what they should be asking is that when we get the material, are we insured for it? So
Okay,
once we've got it, is it ever being returned or we're just using it?
right, yeah.
And it's just
Using it.
human tissue
Human tissue, yeah.
on the sellers, that would be fine.
Okay, right. So maybe just need to,
There's nothing it can't like infect the cell line and destroy the lab or anything, kind of like. That has happened. Yes,
okay, so,
but that would.
There are going to be some, I've had an email this morning actually about some new questions that are going to go on our agreement with possible
Yeah.
around human tissue.
mhm.
But there are some concerns around storage and insurance and everything.
Yeah, okay. So as long as it's in an appropriate facility, things it should be covered by. Yeah, okay, perfect. Thank you.
Is that just a summary or is it like an itemized list of?
It's a summary. So if you need itemized breakdown of costs that have been spent, you need to go to finance contact in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. That was brilliant. Really,
Thank you. Yeah, super helpful.
great. Anyone didn't sign in?
Are we gonna get the slides?
Yes,
Recording, so you can do recording.
Brilliant.